Alright, time for another DraftPhysics.com video presentation. So another one to Michael's Physics, who has, I made a comment, kind of generic, on a general subject of errors, and I sort of, in science and experimentation. And I just pointed out that the biggest error you can make in science is to disregard testing and to say you don't really need to prove it. And that's the error that conventional physics has been guilty of in almost every branch of its physics, whatever it's testing, whether it be the Eddington experiment, where they're proving Einstein right with an experiment that the person who did the experiment said, I wouldn't stake my life on these results. It was so bad. There were so many random errors. And the systematic problem of just measuring something so tiny with kind of inferior equipment, frankly. And we now have 400 times better resolution from space, and the experiment's never been redone from space, even though it takes 5 minutes and you don't need an eclipse. Now, these are real arguments against why their physics is flawed and incredible, is because it really hasn't made itself credible by doing the little tiny bit of things to do to prove the theories. So I make the point that their theory says it takes 4 times the fuel to go twice as fast, yet we have no direct evidence that this is true. Not a single experiment, 300 years, showing us directly a direct connection. So instead they'll show us experiments where, frankly, it's garbage in, garbage out. There's not a systematic error, there's a theoretical error where they claim this is a certain amount of energy that went in, and that calculation is flawed and wrong, and it can be argued, and they won't counter those arguments. So I'm going to make some of those arguments here in the beginning, because he has sort of a short attention span and really doesn't care about this subject, and really is just dismissing all of these accusations that their physics is terrible and evading them, frankly. And he's pretending like somehow I'm supposed to believe, even though he hasn't provided the evidence that a reasonable person should require to believe. Well, it's just wrong. So I'll read his entire comment in this video, and I'll deal with every sentence of it, which he won't do for everything I'm going to say. So I think that's enough. Alright, so it's I'm claiming, okay, that F equals ma is a mess of a statement, in the sense that it's not what Newton said in the first place, and it's not really acceleration that they're using in the equation. They're assuming an acceleration is some sort of thing that is a squared term, that somehow it's a volume of acceleration, a self-creating volume. And that's not what Newton said. And again, they've never proven Newton got a wrong answer somewhere. So it's just an accusation, and it's not based on anything called evidence. So the argument I can make that he hasn't countered is that what theoretically works perfectly is understanding 9.8 meters per 1 second is what Newton said. Yes, he said per second, but it's per 1 second. This is the ratio. If it's 2 seconds, then it's 19.6, and if it's a half a second, it's 4.9, and all of that. This is the ratio, 9.1 to 1 unit of time. And then that you multiply times the number of these units. So if it's 4 seconds, okay, then you just do this simple multiplication. You just say, okay, you do multiply the 9.8 times the 4. That's what you do, and that'll tell you what your velocity is, and that'll tell you it's 2 units or 4 units or 5 units of force that goes in. And frankly, it's that many units of force that comes out, because Newton basically said in direct statements that if you want to go twice as fast, you put in twice as much force. You want to go 3 times as fast, you put in 3 times as much force. That the force has an equality to the momentum, in the case where the mass is constant. So if the mass is constant, then it's all just a direct correlation between force and velocity. And who cares, frankly, Okay, knowing the rate of the change of velocity is important, but obviously it's not some magical acceleration. So what they have done is said it's 9.8 meters, okay, per second squared. They're squaring this, and obviously these are two different numbers. The 4 is very different than the 1. You can't square two different numbers. They're two different seconds, in a sense. They're two different units. This is the number of this unit. This is how many of these units you're using. So the right way to understand gravity is that it's completely time dependent. So I can just make the simple argument that this is an experimentally done test, that if I actually did shoot something straight through gravity, that the amount it's going to bend, okay, is completely not dependent on this distance. That, you know, we're just counting this distance and what happens to it over that distance. The faster I make it go, the less it gets bent, okay, and the slower it goes, the more it gets bent. Clearly indicating that gravity is essentially like a paint sprayer or a photon, a light bulb. The longer you're in the light, the more suntan you get. The shorter time you're in the light, the less suntan you get. It's completely a time-dependent force. This distance will not guarantee you anything unless you start from 0, okay, and then you can calculate the distance. But I mean, it's in free fall gravity. The correct way to understand what's the actual mechanism is time dependent and not distant dependent. If you always want to get the right answer, you just ask how long were you exposed to the radiation, and that'll tell you how much radiation you absorbed. And it's that kind of simple, and this is a very good argument, and it won't be countered by any physicist. You won't explain how it's time dependency as an understanding that it's a unit of time. You have a change in your velocity based on a unit of time, and you can have a certain number of those units of time, and it'll tell you how much your force is total. It'll give you a net answer. They won't explain how that gets a wrong answer anywhere, okay, or why it's a wrong theory. Absolutely nothing provided. All right. Pause for a moment, clean up. All right, there is an irony in this conversation. He's claiming I haven't done any experiments when I have. What I'm not going to do is show you experiments that are flawed, right? So I and other people have done experiments, but they all are a little bit dodgy because we're doing frame rates with inferior cameras. We had to go through a whole conversation about quick releases and how important they are. Lots of dynamics, angular rotation. The fact is you have to understand that you can store energy in your angular rotation rather than in the actual movement horizontally, and that there's just a simple truth. In some systems you have to provide the energy to bend you, like in a gravitational orbit. The angular momentum of your orbit is completely provided, the energy for it, by the external world. The external gravity is actually pushing you and allowing you to go around in a circle. Where if you're a runner on a track or a race car, unless I tilt the racetrack up, you have to provide the turning force, and you'll lose a lot of your velocity to providing that angular rotation, that angular motion. So, these are all real physics ideas and concepts, and they've been gone over in these videos, and you're just discounting it all and saying you don't have to pay any attention to those arguments, and you can make the accusation that no experiments have been done. The simple argument, completely consistent with what's argued in your video about the danger of these errors, is that doing these experiments amateurly introduces all kinds of random errors, and frankly all kinds of systematic errors, in the sense that the people doing these experiments aren't experts, and they miss things like quick release. They miss things like, okay, a mechanical release is the same thing as a quick release. Well, it's actually not the same thing. So all the details get lost because amateurs don't know them, and they don't know how to detect them, and they don't know how to see them. And so a bunch of amateur experiments isn't going to do physics any good. That's another simple argument I'm making that you haven't countered. I mean, the very idea that you're asking me to do these fundamental elemental physics experiments to prove things that should have been proven hundreds of years ago. I mean, again, you don't prove to me it takes twice the energy to go twice as fast. I mean, 4 times the energy to go forward twice as fast. You don't prove it to me. And yet, you claim I have to prove something to you. I mean, it's hypocrisy and duplicity, in the sense my accusation to you is you haven't done any of this scrutiny. You haven't done the testing, and you haven't done the testing well, because you're showing me experiments that have systematic errors, and you're showing me experiments that certainly have a bunch of random errors. Okay. So this goes to these simple arguments about all these different ways you could test, and the point is that I have referenced, material on the internet. So the Mythbusters are rather famous characters. They did the experiment, 50 mile an hour, 100 mile an hour car. They took actual cars and crashed them into a brick wall, and they found that the 100 mile an hour car crushes exactly, twice as much as the 50 mile an hour. Now that could be a systematic error. I mean, it could be true that somehow cars just happen to crush it exactly. They provided an extra resistance force, in the sense that they get harder and harder to crush at exactly the right ratio, okay, at these speeds. So maybe at 25 and 50, we wouldn't get the same results, or maybe at 150 and 100, we wouldn't get the same results. Yes, we only have the one test, so it's a flaw. It's a systematic error. Not to test in all these different variable ways to make sure that there isn't something about cars that just don't crush evenly. But the fact is on its face, it looks like your theory's wrong. There's no obvious. I mean, we could go to the NSA or whatever it's called that does all these car tests. They're not going to find your kinetic energy theory to be true either. So they did another experiment where they swung clay, a cylinder of clay, into a wall and duplicated 150, the 2-to-1 relationship anyway. And again, the clay squished, out of the cylinder of clay, it squished at exactly the same ratio, 2-to-1. No evidence of 4-to-1, not there. So these experiments have been done. I mean, I can challenge you with them. Now, they're imperfect, and that's part of the reason why I'm saying, gee, it would be better if we had all these stuff done right. But it is out there. I can show you experiments where it doesn't work. I could show you Professor Lewin doing the free energy and the free momentum experiment, the one you did. And I can show it in a version, where well, at first I can show him doing in a version like yours with an air track where there's a bunch of clay on one of the carts, and the carts really aren't reasonably perceived to be of 2-to-1 masses. So all right, but more importantly, he does the experiment with the Velcro, and he's supposed to be getting these cars to stick to each other. So he has the 2 mass and the 1 mass, and they're supposed to stick and then travel off. Now, the fact is they do that, and they lose a ton of kinetic energy, and the explanation is just stated by your physics. Well, it was always heat, deformation, a bunch of stuff happened. So the carts deformed each other, or created sound, or did all of this other stuff, and they didn't use any momentum? So you perfectly conserve the momentum, right? You get your number 3 here, with a perfectly conserved momentum, and yet you lost a big giant hunk of energy, more than half the energy. And that's acceptable to you as a theoretical premise. I would argue that that's challenging. That's not very sensible or reasonable or rational, and that you should be saying, well, we got to figure that out. How do you actually move matter in the universe without using something's momentum? I mean, some moving object's actual movement. How do you exchange movement without using something's movement? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. Well, anyway, so he does the experiment he's attempting to do. It comes out with an answer that's not too good. And then certainly because he does it and he has a random error, the Velcro doesn't stick. And what he ends up with is a cart going forward, that has much less than half the speed, half the velocity from this one. And this one has some velocity actually still going forward. So this one still goes forward a little bit, and this one only has half the original velocity. But when you total that up, it still conserves the momentum. So if you add this to this, it works. And I would argue it doesn't matter which way there's no such thing as scalar or vector. So I could even make that accusation. I mean, is there any way physics can rationalize the creation of scalar versus vector? I mean, the 1/2 mv squared is made out of momentum. That's at its core. That's the real thing at the core, mass and velocity. That has a vector. All of a sudden, somehow the vector disappears if I do this. I mean, if I add these little stupid numbers, all of a sudden I've changed it fundamentally for something that does subtract to something that doesn't subtract. I'd say that's a challenging thing to say. That's a bold thing to say. It should be better reasoned than what I've gotten as a reasoning, which is nothing. But anyway, so the experiment really didn't work. So it didn't do what it was supposed to do. I mean, it went from being an inelastic experiment to being an elastic experiment. And frankly, unless you're going to sit there and blame the Velcro somehow and say, oh, it consumed a tremendous amount of energy, it's still not going to work because you still lost a ton of kinetic energy. But you did fundamentally conserve the momentum once again. Momentum proved itself conservational. Alright, so we'll go to a third argument. Okay, a third argument I'd say you haven't touched, you really haven't addressed at all. I've offered to pay you money to address it and you won't do it, is this whole idea of which one is conserved in all of these kind of collision experiments and these different ways you can store energy, say a spring or a lever or hydraulic systems with cylinders, that there's no way to get around the fact that, you have to conserve the momentum, and there's really no sign of conserving kinetic energy in any of these experiments. They all kind of prove the case. I mean, I did the lever experiment on my porch. I could make it perfectly oscillate with a 4-to-1 relationship. Okay, so this is a 1 mass, this is a 1/4 mass. This oscillates at 4 times the velocity that this one oscillates at. Perfect. Okay, no problem. It's an oscillator, so you do have to know the energy is going back and forth. So the same energy here, you only have, only have, let's say 250 joules, and you have 1,000 joules on this side of the oscillator. Doesn't make any sense. Isn't consistent with reality. Now we don't have this experiment. Your physics has never done this simple task of taking a 10 velocity, well, let's just say it's the 2-to-1 thing. So we're used to using 5 and 10. So we have a 5 mass going, no, we want to use the 10 mass going 5. So we take a 10 mass going 5 velocity, we push it into one side of a horizontal lever to get rid of the whole gravity problem, and do we get a 5 mass 10 velocity out? And if we do, we've created free energy, and we know your theory can't be correct. We don't have that experiment. Nothing. So the amateurs have done some versions of this, okay, but they all are incredibly flawed. So again, amateur physics can't do it. This needs to be done by science. This needs to be done in laboratories by people who have micrometers and are doing things correctly. And you saying I should do it to prove you wrong, I mean, what is that? No, you should do it to prove you right. Alright, and the same thing, you've made the argument that somehow springs create different amounts of energy depending on what I put on them. So if I put light objects on them, different amounts of momentum, sorry. I mean, momentum is energy from Newton and my perspective, frankly. So I have the same compression and I put 2 different size masses, and as long as they're even masses, I can change how much momentum will come out of this system. You did an experiment where you got 3,000 here, and you got 1,000 here. And, one could assume that it just gets better and better. The lighter I go, the less energy the spring puts into things, and the heavier I go, somehow I get more energy into something. Now I'd say that doesn't theoretically make much sense, so I think you should prove that the spring can't produce. Now I'd make the argument that I can throw the 10-ton train, I can throw the 10 mass going 5, okay, into a spring and compress it a certain amount, and then if I put the 10 mass, okay, the 5 mass on the spring, same spring, after it's been compressed, the same spring compression that this one has as a maximum compression, I'll get the 10 velocity out, no problem. again, I'll create free kinetic energy. If I'll have a free kinetic energy machine. Now, another experiment that has been done, I can show it to you. I mean, it's an amateur experiment. Again, I'm really not a huge advocate of physics being defined by a bunch of amateur experiments done poorly. But, I mean, it has been done. Do you have an explanation? I mean, I take simple pendulums, okay, and I do the same experiment. I compete. I say, let's let the 5 versus 10 train, the 10-ton train going 5 miles an hour. Damn it. This is the 5 going 10. Sorry, I'm trying to be as quick as possible because I know, like I said, your attention span is very limited and you really can't put up with these arguments about, that physics should actually be argued. All right, so I have the competition, okay? So I do this thing here, the 4 times the height. I double the velocity here, so I have a 5 going 10, I have a 10 going 5. I have them crash into each other right here. Now, what's the expectation? This has twice the energy, 2x the energy. Isn't the expectation that it should be able to push the collision in its direction? I mean, that'll happen with car crashes all the time. Momentum's able to push the collision. So this magical kinetic energy, frankly, lost the competition. It didn't prove itself to be capable of doing anything at all. Okay, the collision stayed exactly where it was, and the reflections came off. And that was it. The collision did not move in the direction of the 5-ton train. The 5-ton train didn't show that it had any more energy. The collision just banged right in the middle, stayed right in the middle. And we know that the mechanics of a car crash aren't like that. We know that the lighter car can push into the heavier vehicle if it has more momentum, and that the heavy thing will push the light thing if it has more momentum. So we know that's how it works, but when they have the same momentum, yeah, we know that the crash will stay right where it is. So momentum again is working perfectly, no problems, but your kinetic energy theory seems a little wobbly here. Alright, so I think that's enough citation to some of the experiments that have been done. Some of these experiments I can't do. Okay, you want me to prove that tired light is a better theory than Einstein's expanding space notion? I don't even know if that's entirely Einstein's fault, frankly. That you're making new units of space and that space is expanding instead of this, because all we're trying to do is explain redshift, frankly. And redshift can be explained by scattering. So every time, theoretically, a piece of a photon hits a piece of matter in empty space, and there's lots of matter in empty space, right? We know it's not really empty. Lots of hydrogen atoms, it's going to lose a little bit of frequency, and that's a known fact, a proven experimental fact, and it's perfectly reasonable to suspect that if something's going to move billions of light years through space, that is probably going to hit a few of those and lose some frequency. And so redshifting isn't a big surprise, and you don't need to make new space. So, but I can't prove that to you, right? I mean, that's not within my capacity to do those experiments to prove it to you, just like I can't do the Eddington experiment well enough. When we had the best possible eclipse over North America, 12 noon, perfect eclipse, right? Eddington's was a 2 o'clocker. It wasn't even a very good one. 12 noon eclipse right over North America. Nobody did the experiment but an amateur again. And if you look at his paper, it is amateur. It's a pile of crap, frankly, in terms of all the random and systematic errors that are built into it, in terms of having to make assumptions about how well the processing software works and how well using star charts is, and how well the whole method of capturing the photons, whether he's got the right CCD chip and stuff. Lots of places for all kinds of errors. Yeah, that's supposed to be physics. Physics should be done by these, the fact that you can make experiments come out the way you want them to. You can't force the results. It's a real thing, and you're pretending it's not a real thing. Frankly, I'm making the real accusation that that's exactly what's taken place. Eddington's experiment was, in fact, garbage. He knew it, and he didn't really, he was, I guess, persuaded to make a statement one way or the other instead of accepting that the experiment failed. And so instead of admitting that, he decided to go all in, okay, because he was an Einsteinian, one of the only 3 people on Earth who were, and basically push the results in the direction he wanted the truth to be. And that's all that happened, and the experiment hasn't been repeated with better technology, and it certainly hasn't been repeated from space. And that's not good science, and you're just pretending it is good science, and you have that. These aren't facts. These are, in fact, facts. Leibniz, when he invented mv squared, he didn't have any physical proofs. He just had a few thought experiments that, again, are based on wrong assumptions. He assumed that 4 times height in gravity somehow was a per foot force, and you got more per foot. Okay, so the more feet you went in gravity, the more force you got. And he believed that because Newton hadn't published yet, frankly. And then after Newton published, I mean, that sort of just made the argument kind of impossible. And these are facts. The fact is, he completely lost the argument. Okay, mv squared was buried as nonsense. And then it was resurrected in France 40 years later, 60 years later, really. No, really 80 years later from its introduction. It was resurrected as a fad, by free-willers and hipsters and crystal viewers, and with a bogus experiment about dropping round things into clay. I can point out how the shape of the object you drop will change how deep it will penetrate a substance. I can give you a rational argument why that's true. So the experiment has a perfect systematic error in it, in the sense that you have to understand the shape of the object does matter. And so you're going to get flawed results if you don't really understand that as a concept, and that's something important to consider as a variable. So it's a direct accusation that dropping round things into clay or pointy things into clay is very dangerous if you want to measure how much energy something has, especially when you don't drop them far enough to completely immerse the shape. So if the shape isn't even going to be fully utilized, that in the case you're going to just use one part of the shape in one case and 3/4 of the shape in another case, these are real physics arguments, and I can't get you to take money to actually address them. So I'll read my comment now and point out how, again, he has completely evaded everything I said and just propagandized about how great physics is. And how he knows all of these facts about being careful when I'm making direct assertion that your science isn't credible, and it isn't careful, and it hasn't taken the tests, and it's evaded the tests, and I'm advocating for the tests, and you're calling me some sort of crank because I'm advocating for the tests that your physics won't do. All right. 5 minutes from space, really. 5 minutes of satellite time. You don't need a big telescope anymore. 400 times resolution means you don't need a telescope at all. 400 times better. Not 4, not 40. 400 times better seeing. All right. So I'll prepare for the reading. Yeah. All right. So this is the comment I posted on his video. And I'm grateful to get a reply, but again, the reply is evasive, and again, that's your reputation, in my opinion, is going to be on the line, in the sense that you're just going to show, in hindsight, that physics was afraid of these arguments and physics wouldn't pay any attention to them, that they really didn't have the integrity to take them seriously, and even though I offered real money, real compensation for their time to take them seriously, they still wouldn't take them seriously. All right, I think this evades the more important good science obstacle of bad scientific philosophy. So I'm basically saying it's like the Leibniz circumstance. So somebody posted a comment about how Newton and Descartes were religious, and so was Galileo, frankly. So what? They weren't aggressively religious. Okay, they didn't do what Leibniz did, which is complain that that Newton and Descartes were too atheist. Okay, they weren't injecting into their physics anything like that kind of aggressive, we must bend the truth to fit God's, we must glorify the God with the physics. If the physics doesn't match God's vision or God's statements, then the physics must be thrown out. That wasn't what Newton and Descartes were doing. So, big difference. Leibniz was aggressively stating, okay, the physics isn't any good if it doesn't fit my religious perspective. Okay, science is about proving theory through testing. And if you're not going to take the test, okay, so just understand, if you're not going to bother taking the test, if you're not going to do the experiments, who cares about systematic errors and random errors in experiments? You're not even willing to take the test. And that's the truth. In 350 years, they haven't been willing to see if it takes 4 times the fuel to go twice as fast. Kind of a simple thing to test, and they won't test it. They certainly won't test it in any direct way. Okay, it won't matter that you don't have a number 2 pencil or you forgot your glasses. So again, it just doesn't matter. He's doing a whole video about all these systematic ways you can screw up your experiment in the same context where he's telling me to do experiments, amateurs, which doesn't make any sense at all, frankly. It's just such a nonsense. It's such a rhetorical pile of mush for him to be claiming that amateurs should define science. I mean, it's just an absolute nonsense. When he's really saying, in this whole video is about, there's a professionalism here. You really have to be careful how you do experiments, because there are mistakes to be made. For over 300 years, science has claimed it takes 4 times the energy to make something go twice as fast. Where is there any direct, credible evidence this theory fact has ever been tested? So again, they've just evaded the test. We just don't have anything. In 300 years, we don't have them crashing anything into anything. We don't have them weighing things on levers. We don't have them pushing things into hydraulic cylinders to prove it. Not a single experimental piece of data actually directly showing this theory being true. Car crash tests don't show 4 times the damage applying twice the velocity. So that's just a fact. We can show at least the Mythbusters, but I'm sure we can show lots of other crash tests done with the crash dummies, and we can see pretty clearly that the cars just don't crush by this theory. Kinetic energy doesn't show itself in those experiments. A good scientist shouldn't say something as so if it cannot show something to be so. So that was my statement, and again, he just doesn't deal with any of it. Okay, he just does this propaganda. The first video in this series, so he just links to his own playlist. So these are all videos I saw, and I pointed out the flaws in them, and he didn't address any of my critiques of why the experiments are flawed. Okay, specifically focuses on the critical importance of experimental tests. So again, and my exact accusation is that there's no evidence you've tested any of this crap. You don't test for the Eddington phenomenon of twice the gravitational bending, and the tests that you will do are ones that are completely systematically flawed, in the sense you're still going through densely packed material substances and then calling their diffraction, the fact that matter diffracts light, you're calling that gravitational lensing. I mean, that's cheating all over the place. Using data to build models, whatever that is. This data collection is the whole argument, that there isn't any data collection. The data is as synthetic as your simulations and the rest of it. It's all just you say so. You haven't proven so or shown so. Physical systems with predictive power. Yeah, I have predictive power too. But we can't. There's no point in having predictive power if you're just going to say it came out our way, even though you can't show that it came out your way. You're saying it works, yet you can't show me it working. Okay, and then further testing those models. So there is no. That's the whole argument. You're not testing any of these fundamental claims you're making about reality. You say gravity bends light twice as much as any other material object in the universe. Somehow light is special and it gets twice as bent, which is bizarre. The very fact that a force, which light is, gets bent doesn't make any sense, because no other force, magnetism or any other form of speed of light radiation, doesn't bend. Except material radiation. You can't bend. Well, heat's not a good example, but you can't. There's something besides. There's light, and there's photons, and I'm just missing what the other stuff is. But anyway, I agree. Gravity doesn't bend gravity. Okay, I agree. This is the starting point. So I mean, obviously the starting point is you have to be willing to do the experiments that will show your theory to be correct. And again, the argument is this big science has had a ton of money and they haven't done any of these elemental experiments. They haven't proved any of their foundational axioms, and they just tell us these things are true. Okay, they tell us, that space is bent, and they tell us that there's time dilation, right? When all you're really proven is that if you move matter, okay, moving matter breaks clocks. So if you're using an atomic clock, if you move a radioactive isotope with velocity, it will decay slower. That's all that's been demonstrated in an experiment. Okay, in this video and the upcoming ones, again, more promises. They really aren't directly responsive to any of these accusations. Go into more detail with how we develop experiments. So developing the experiment is only part of the task, but again, the whole point is I can develop a lot of experiments. You haven't done any of them. You haven't swung anything in the Newton's cradle. You haven't done the simple experiment. Take the inverse mass to velocity ratio objects and smash them into each other and see what happens. You haven't done them. All right, take data, analyze that data, and reach conclusions. No, you have reached conclusions without the data, without analyzing the data, and without analyzing the experiments. I mean, clearly I can describe, like, again, the lever experiment hasn't been done. Simple thing, just put inverse mass to velocity ratios in. Put the bullet on one side of the lever, put the gun on the other side of the lever, see what happens. And understanding the different types of errors, it's important to analyze and interpreting data. So again, just a complete evasion of my argument, which is you can't take data if you don't do the experiment. And clearly when you do the experiments, you're basically advocating for a bunch of sloppy experiments with clay on them, and saying that's okay. All right. The goal is to go to more detail on how we test ideas in a rigorous way. So again, they're claiming they test in a rigorous way, and I can just keep pointing out in every single case there is no rigorous testing. Nothing. Okay. The testing physics series that I'm developing in parallel with this one, so he's got another series that doesn't seem much different, actually goes through specific experiments demonstrating the application of these concepts. So again, where? I mean, frankly, this is just so bogus. These experiments, you've already claimed that you've proven that momentum isn't conserved in springs. Okay, which in my opinion is just absurd. I mean, you're claiming it is conserved because it's 50-50, but you're not claiming that the same spring compression can create all kinds of different momentums depending on what I put in front of the spring, which I'm saying is just an absurd, But anyway, I've already covered these tests of our understanding of kinetic energy. So again, your understanding of kinetic energy really is based on no experimental data, so let's not pretend you have any. All right, we're really just back to 1738 and dropping round things into clay, and since then you haven't developed any formal evidence of any kind. The fact that the quantity we call kinetic energy has a V2 dependence and has properties that allow us to predict how physical systems will act in different conditions. So again, you aren't accurately predicting because you aren't doing the experiment. So again, it's just so bogus to say you accurately predicted when you don't do the experiment. And again, I've done some of the experiments. I mean, there's no denying that the oscillator is oscillating with 4 times the energy on one side than it has on the other side. And there's every reason to believe that if I stopped that oscillator and the object was allowed to move in free space, that frankly the one object's going to move 4 times faster than the other object. That in fact I'm going to convert the energy from a 5-ton train going 10 miles, I mean a 10-ton train going 5 miles an hour, and I am going to convert its momentum into a 5-ton train going 10. And I am going to create free energy by your theory. Okay, energy has a V2 dependence and has properties that allow us to predict how physical systems will act in different conditions. Okay, so again, you haven't done any of that. It's just, that's just nonsense. It's just, you're just showing you're cheating. Okay, because you really don't have any of that. All right, and he says, isn't part of my philosophy. I don't know what that even means, right? the fact that that doesn't even make any sense. The fact that the quantity we call kinetic energy has a V2 dependence and has properties that allow us to predict how physical systems will act in different conditions isn't part of my philosophy. I don't even know what that means. I mean, it's clearly part of what you're contending. I mean, you're defending the theory. I can't even understand. So I guess maybe he's saying the fact that I have proven that to be true isn't a philosophical issue. Well, it is a philosophical issue in the sense that I think it's a completely nonsensical claim that in any way you have any evidence demonstrating it, because I can't find any of that evidence. Okay, it has a high confidence position. From what? So this is the joke. I'm making the exact accusation that it has a low confidence position because there's so little evidence. You have zero evidence to show me. 350 years, you don't have any physical evidence that you can show me where you poured 4 times the fuel in to go twice as fast. You don't have a single piece of experimental data showing that to be true. And you're saying direct physical evidence. Just pouring gas in a car and seeing how far the car goes, or nothing. I and the rest of the scientific community holds. So this is more bold talk. He's talking for all the other physicists now, yet ultimately tentative and subject to revision, as is the case when objects are moving close to the speed of light. So now he's just making his deference to the silly bent space theories. Which are just nonsense anyway. So he's saying in every case where it's not moving the speed of light that somehow they have a high confidence position. When my direct accusation is it should be an insanely low confidence position because you really haven't redone any of these experiments. You haven't done any of the experiments. You really haven't proven it at all. You haven't even come close. And like in the Eddington case, yeah, where's the evidence? You had a perfect eclipse. You didn't do it. You have all kinds of NASA technology up there in space, 400 times better resolution, and you don't touch the subject. All right, the case when objects are moving close to the speed of light, due to the fact that it has survived the intense scrutiny. So again, what intense scrutiny? You're running for my scrutiny. You haven't gotten any scrutiny. Who's objected? Who? Show me the dissident science who's objected. Okay, to your pronouncements. I mean, not a single one will show up and do any research. I mean, I'm probably the only person that points out on the internet that Eddington said right in his own journal, okay, I wouldn't stake my life on these results. After he talked about the fact that he got 1/10 of the quality, right? He talked about how he was hoping for 10,000 stars on his slides. And he got 1,000. I mean, it's an incredible deprivation in the quality of the experimental data. It was already a very difficult experiment to do right, and he has terrible data. I'm the only person on the internet scrutinizing. Where have you survived any intense scrutiny? You haven't even minor little scratching on this silly paint you have, this facade. Your facade can't take a tiny scratch, let alone any intense scrutiny. I mean, it's bizarre that you would even say something like that. There's no evidence that any of you cult members ever had to defend your cult. Okay, and repeat testing. So again, just the Eddington experiment, perfect example, no repeat. Every time attempted some kind of flaw. Their technology failed, or the weather failed, or the eclipse itself was 3 o'clock in the afternoon and useless. So never repeated with superior technology in 100 years. Which are the parts that do constitute a good scientific philosophy. So again, he's just defending that their physics is perfectly upstanding and strong and well done, when I'm making the direct accusation that in 300 years you can't prove something it takes 4 times the fuel to go twice as fast. A really bold accusation, very direct. Every day people are hitting the high button, on some machine somewhere where it's going to go twice as fast. And frankly, I bet that person doesn't know, oh, it's 4 times the energy when I do that? Holy shit, I didn't know. Every day people are stepping on their gas pedal. Do they know it's 4 times the fuel they're using? They don't see it happening, frankly, in their world, and so you really should show it to us. But you won't do that. Even if I pay you, you won't do it. I know that you already know about my other videos. Yes, I've critiqued them. I've pointed out the flaws in the theory. Okay, so that's part of it. Theory, and then you have systematic errors, and then you have random errors. So yeah, there's lots of things to worry about, and I've pointed out the flaws of these experiments and how some of them aren't even theoretically rational, frankly. The way you calculate energy going into your drop weights on a string is completely wrong. I mean, it's not going to get the right answer, and I can predict the right answer, okay, using Newton's mechanics. And don't accept the results of my experiments on kinetic energy. That's right, I don't think they're credible experiments, and they're certainly not direct experiments. They seem as indirect as you can possibly get, okay, and rather than as direct as you can get. And yes, the idea that springs produce different momentums based on what weight I put on top of the spring, I'd say yes, that's inconsistent with every spring I've known. Every spring I've known can expand at all kinds of speeds. It can give you all kinds of different speeds. It doesn't really care about how fast it's compressed, and it really doesn't care about how fast it expands. It just cares that it has a certain amount of energy stored in it. I still haven't heard you give a good reason why you think those particular experiments are invalid. Well, I don't know how you missed it. I mean, I made direct videos pointing them out. I pointed out to you how fast the object is falling. You're just the only thing changing the free fall. The object is falling in gravity. You're changing its free fall speed by tying a string to it. I explained all of this. Okay, the Newton's theory is just saying it's time. So you're changing how long it takes the object to fall. By changing how long it takes to fall, it's in gravity longer, so it's collecting extra gravitational 9.8 meters per second. Now, even though it's not moving with that velocity, it's collecting that velocity and it's giving it to the car. So if you just compare the times, the free fall time, and compare it to the now slowed down time because you're tying the string to a car, that difference will tell you exactly how much energy went in the car. You're generally just deflected. You've generally just deflected to talking about levers. So it's just hilarious, right? I am talking about all these devices that are obvious testing devices, the best testing devices you can get, as scales, measure weight. What the hell is weight? Well, I'm claiming weight is actually energy, okay, that's an energy detector, because the only way that scale moves is you have to have a force affect some piece of matter and throw it into the scale. So as I did calculate, actually, if you want to know what your weight is horizontally, all I have to do is give you 1 mile an hour velocity. So with a 1 mile an hour velocity, I can throw any object into this scale and it will accurately read its weight. So when you're in gravity, basically the part of gravity that's giving you your weight is 1 mile an hour velocity. A 1 mile an hour velocity, swinging any weight into this scale horizontally at 1 mile an hour, say on a pendulum or something. So 1 mile an hour at impact, and that'll give you an impulse weight that'll be exactly your weight. Yeah, it won't stay there, but yeah, it'll go that far. It'll tell you exactly how much you weigh. So I've deflected your evasions by pointing out how clearly I'm not evading the subjects. I'm very interested in the subjects, and I'm the one doing the research and then finding the details. And you're the ones ignoring all of that detail. Let's see. Deflected to talking about levers and simply saying that you don't think the experiment can be right. Well, that's not what I said. I explained why it's not right, and frankly, it's not consistent with other experimental data. So that's the question. You have to explain why there's no consistency. Why, when the Professor Lewin experiment trying to do the elastic experiment, and he ends up with an inelastic experiment, why isn't that inelastic experiment consistent with what it's supposed to do? Okay, neither of which are close to defeaters. I don't know what that could mean. which are close to defeaters, and both of which I've responded to in detail. So I'm sorry. I mean, that's just disingenuous mush. You haven't in any way responded to a single argument I have made. Not a single one of them. Gravity is a time-dependent force, completely controlled by how long you're in gravity. It tells you how much force you're collecting, as if it was sunlight or as if it was paint. It's just about how long you're in the spray of gravity. Where did you address that in any way and demonstrate how you have any evidence that that's incorrect? Okay, if you hold to this philosophy of testing ideas, and please go through an experiment. Show how you made the measurements. So again, he's telling people to do rickety, crappy experiments when he's complaining that, well, science really isn't about doing rickety, crappy experiments. It's really understanding all these capacities to make errors. And if you don't understand all of that crap, you really shouldn't be doing the experiment, frankly. Okay, and demonstrate a system where the classical ideas of conservation of energy don't hold. So this is so obnoxious. I'm the one defending the classical idea of conservation of energy. I'm defending Descartes. I'm defending Galileo. I'm defending Newton against your attack. Okay, you said there was something grossly inefficient about their physics, that somehow they only guessed right answers, I guess, because their theory is completely wrong. I mean, it's just so ironic that you can type this crap and make this accusation. I'm defending conservation of energy, known as a quantity of motion in Newton's terms, in Newton's terminology. I'm defending that 2 units of force only equal 2 units of energy. I love to see it. So again, you make this claim and yet you evaded every bit of argument I have made, and you have dismissed me and dismissed the quality of my research and the quality of the 10 years I've spent on this subject, and just put it off as if you don't have to respond, even though I've asked you how much it would cost me to burden you, okay, with actually doing some research and actually pointing out where you have a piece of evidence demonstrating any of this crap. And you won't do it, and so you're just proving yourself to lack a little bit of what I would call integrity and honor to make this lying statement that I'm not defending classical physics and the classical laws of classical physics. That's what I'm defending. But you need to actually do the experiment. So again, I have done experiments. I built my own version of an air track using cylindrical PVC, and yes, I found the results to be inadequate, okay, because I realized I'm introducing energy into the system, okay. It's just a fact. To get rid of friction, I'm adding energy, and that's a systematic error in the sense that, you know, if you can't make sure the cart can't turn at all, you're really in trouble, because every time it turns or wobbles, it creates a vent that adds energy to the system. These are real facts, okay, that we have all learned. I mean, there was one of my detractors, okay, made like 3 air tracks trying to get it to work appropriately to prove me wrong, okay, and he had trouble getting it to work good enough for that purpose. So, blah, 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 blah. All right, I'm not just making claims. I'm citing references. I'm citing the fact that you don't have any evidence, which is the real first accusation, is that if you're going to make claims, you should have to back them up, and that you're just a duplicitous coward in a way to claim I have to prove you wrong, but you don't have to prove me wrong, okay, and that your theory doesn't have to be proven right. I have to prove it wrong. I mean, that's not the burden. Your burden is actually to come to court with evidence. If you're going to say there's a gun, produce it. If you're going to say there's fingerprints, produce them. And you haven't done any of that. You haven't met any of these burdens. And you're just being pretty freaking obnoxious, frankly, as a human being. You're just being one of these cliche religious kooks who just defends their wacky nonsense with all kinds of rationalizations. These are just rationalizations and excuses, and they're not even well-formed excuses. What's your excuse for NASA not doing the Eddington experiment from space? What possible excuse can you come out for us being in space for 50 years and not doing this fundamental experiment? What possible reasonable answer is there? to why that hasn't been done. It costs almost nothing. It takes 5 minutes of data collection. I mean, why hasn't it been done? You won't answer the question. Alright, so, yeah, that's probably enough of a video. So you can just go over it, and they'll never respond to what I'm actually saying. They'll not respond to the arguments in context. They will not, in some way, prove that I have made any logical or reasoning errors, that I am demanding too much from physics in any way by saying, show me. And they won't do it in a credible way. And they'll just keep forcing me to debunk experiments that have systematic errors all over the place and random errors all over the place. The very thing he's making this argument that physics cares about is the very thing physics doesn't care about at all. As long as the experiment comes out their way, who cares about systematic and random errors? Alright, so again, the Lewin experiment with the blobs of clay on the carts. I mean, come on. You know, that's just screaming error. Okay, till the next time, and such, and so forth and whatnot. Not much I can do. I can only do my job. Okay, I can't make other people reasonable or fair, or, you know, can't make the boys into men kind of thing. You know, they have to grow up themselves.